Saludos a toda la audiencia del Fórum Amec. Actualmente hay más de 3.000 empresas de 70 países diferentes que se han unido al movimiento B Corp. Un movimiento cuyo único fin lo definen como que todas las compañías compitan para ser las mejores para el mundo. Y como resultado, la sociedad camine hacia estadios de bienestar compartidos y sostenibles superiores. Hoy tenemos el enorme privilegio de contar con el gran impulsor de este movimiento, el movimiento B Corp, el empresario Jay Coen Gilbert, que lleva ya años proponiendo nuevas maneras de trabajar para que las empresas se conviertan en una importante fuerza regeneradora de la sociedad y del planeta. Hello, Jay. Thank you so much for dedicating some time to us in your busy schedule. And tell us about B Corp. What is it? What is B Corp?
Thank you, Diego. Thanks for having me, and greetings to everybody in the Amec community. B Corp is our companies. B corporations are companies around the world that meet the most rigorous standards of overall social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability to balance purpose and profit. There are over 3,500 certified B corporations in over 80 countries and 150 industries all around the world. And they represent both small businesses like the Amec community, as well as large publicly traded companies.
Okay, so before founding B Corporation Foundation with other partners, you started and successfully sold a company, and let's say a traditional company, N1 of apparel and footwear for basketball. And tell us about your experience in that company. What did you see there in the business world that moved you afterwards to found B Corp?
Oh, that's a good question, Diego. Our experience at And1 was powerful, both because we could see the potential for business to do incredibly beautiful things for our workers, for the workers in our factories, and for the communities that we operated in. But we also saw the dangers of practicing business in a less conscious, intentional way. We had choices at And1 to work with factories that didn't pay their workers fairly, weren't in safe conditions, and that weren't good stewards of the environment. And we had a choice as business people. We had a choice either to chase the lowest cost for our business, but maybe the highest cost for the people and the planet, or to pursue relationships in business that enabled us to make money, but also enabled us to make a difference in the world and be respectful of the people that we were in business with. Not just the people that we could see every day, but also often the young women that were in the factories, often in Asia, that were working every bit as hard or harder than we were to create the products that we were selling. And we wanted to run our business in a way that we could be proud of. And that meant being proud of the way that they were treated, not just proud of how much money we made. And so at And1, we saw both the power of creativity and wealth creation, but also the responsibility to make sure we did that in a way that was respectful of all the people that were creating that value, not just ourselves.
Okay. Well, you are in the case that many of our companies in Amec, our audience actually, which are SMEs that are acting globally in different markets, they are competing all over the world in different countries with a very high competition. So how do you, let's say, balance between these new values and the hard competition that you have in the market with Chinese companies, low-cost countries companies, etc.? How can you balance this?
Yeah, Diego, it's a great question and one that we get all the time. And I would say that the question starts from a faulty premise. The premise is that, doing these good things will cost me more money and will make me less competitive. That's the underlying assumption of your question. I think the better assumption is that if you don't do these things, you will actually be uncompetitive in the marketplace. And the most clear example of that is if you're competing for talent. Every CEO I've ever spoken with from a small technology company to a large consumer products company, private, public, doesn't matter. Their number one concern is, are they going to be able to attract and retain the best talent, right? The best workforce that's going to help them innovate and solve all the myriad problems that you come up with as a business leader. And if you're going to compete for talent in the 21st century, you have to compete on more than just the paycheck. You have to compete on purpose. And the purpose means much more than just lofty words that are put up on a wall. It means, are you putting those words into practice? Are you living your values with concrete actions? And so becoming a certified B Corporation is one example of a way that you can demonstrate to your most important asset, the people that work for you, that this is the kind of company they can be proud to work for, and that they can bring their whole selves to work every day, because the company is putting, they're walking their talk, right? They're putting their purpose into, and their principles into practice. And without that, you won't be competitive. I think the same thing is true, not just for employees, but also for your customers. Increasingly, people all around the world, because your workers are also, they take their money and they go spend it somewhere. So we just wear different hats, right? We're an employee, we're a customer, we're an entrepreneur. And so as customers, we're looking for the same thing. We're looking to spend our money consistent with our values. And we're looking to put our money behind companies who authentically take care of all their stakeholders. And so I'd say both from an employee worker talent acquisition standpoint, or from a customer engagement and acquisition standpoint, I think if you're not serious about being like a B Corp, whether you're certified or not, but behaving like a B Corp, you run the risk of being not competitive in today's marketplace.
Okay, tell us about the certification. There are many people that say, well, this is social environmental makeup. This is something that the companies are doing in order to do, let's say, social marketing. Okay, how do you ensure that this is a reliable movement for the companies from B Corp?
Diego, that's a great point. And it's exactly why B Corp was created, is because 15 years ago, everybody was calling themselves responsible or green business or a sustainable business. And those words didn't mean anything because everybody's using them and there are no standards. And so what the B Corp model brought into the marketplace was a set of rigorous and comprehensive standards for social and environmental performance, for how you treat your workers, how you treat your suppliers, how you treat your employees, how you treat your customers, how you treat your community, how you take care of the environment. And so B Corps go through a very rigorous third-party verified set of standards on how they create positive stakeholder impact. They're also then transparent. So whatever they go through that B impact assessment that measures all of those stakeholder impacts, and then they must be transparent about their performance. So you can go onto bcorporation.net and see all 3,500 B corporations with their B impact report, and you as a customer, or you as a worker, or you as a supplier, you as a policymaker or an investor can see exactly what they're doing and how they're performing against their peers. And then the last thing, Diego, because all the standards are imperfect, including the B Corp standards, there's no set of checklist that will capture everything or that is going to be perfectly worded to avoid confusion or mistakes, because we're all human. And so the other thing that the B Corps do is they meet a set of legal requirements. And those legal requirements actually change the DNA of the business and change the fiduciary duty, the legal obligation of the directors and officers of the company, so that they have a legal obligation to consider the impact of their decisions on all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders. So a traditional corporation, whether it's in Spain or the US or anywhere in Europe, they have a legal duty to serve the best interests of the company, which is generally to maximize the value for the shareholders, no matter what the costs are to the workers or the environment. B Corps have a very different duty, which is while they're making money and competing in the marketplace, they have to do so responsibly. And so that change from rigorous verified performance standards, public transparency, and then a legal accountability to balance purpose and profit are three things that make a B Corp different and more credible than the average business that just says those words, but hasn't been independently verified or legally accountable to live up to them.
Okay, you say the big government, your goal is to make the companies to compete for a better world.
Yes.
to make the world better. You want to make a better world. Tell us some examples of B Corps or of achievements that B Corps are achieving in the last years.
Sure. So there's individual achievements and then collective achievements. So individually, there are B corporations who, even in low margin industries like fast casual restaurants, right? Or grocery business, retail, are paying all their employees a living wage. That's a big deal. If you're gonna in a low margin business, figure out a business model where you can treat every worker with respect, so they can provide for themselves and their families and contribute to their communities. Paying a living wage is an example. So a company like Buy Right shopping center in the Bay Area in San Francisco, or a fast casual restaurant like Bo Loco in the Northeast in the US, that are paying a living wage, are like examples of companies that are doing something very tangible and concrete. Companies like Rhino Foods that supply the cookie dough for Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavors all around the world. They have an amazing program called an income advance program, which makes sure that any employee in the company that needs an emergency loan to take care of an unexpected expense, get up to $1,000 on the same day, no questions asked. And then through automatic payroll deductions, and they can actually pay that back over time at low interest. And so in a country like the US, which has tens of millions of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, having a company that actually cares for its employees to help them through a difficult emergency situation is an example of a company that's doing something very powerful for its workers. You also have examples like Danone, one of the largest B corporations in the world, that are doing incredible things in the food system to make sure that their suppliers are paid fairly, to make sure that the products themselves are sustainably produced, and that they're healthy for those of us that are eating or drinking them. During the COVID pandemic, Danone created 150 million euro loan fund for the suppliers at the end of their supply chain to make sure that they would be able to withstand the disruption in demand that was surely going to come from the global pandemic. And that's an example of even the largest multinational operating with a sense of interdependence with their supply chain and recognizing that they're all going to succeed together or we're all going to fail together. And so those are examples of individual practices. But I think the thing that inspires me the most about the B Corp community is actually their collective action. And so you've got over 700 companies in Chile who signed onto the Desafío 10X challenge that said, given all the inequality protests that were taking place in Santiago and throughout Chile last fall, they said that's unacceptable. And we as business leaders can take a stand and take a pledge that our CEOs will not make more than 10 times the amount of the average worker in our companies. And now over 1,400 companies throughout Chile have signed on to that Desafío challenge. 700 other companies signed on at the COP25 UN climate gathering that moved from Santiago to Madrid last year, as you remember, at the very last minute. Because of the protests on inequality in Santiago, the climate talks had to move across the Atlantic Ocean to your country. And you all hosted an incredible COP25 where there were some leading companies, multinationals, that committed to be net zero by 2050, consistent with the IPCC goals, et cetera. There were over 700 B corporations that committed to being net zero by 2030. So 20 years ahead of the climate Paris Agreement. And so whether it's about inequality or about climate change, the power of the B Corps is not just in meeting those standards individually or having best practices individually, but also working together to create a much more powerful leadership example for other companies to follow on the most important issues of our time.
Okay, we'll talk later about the collective goals because you're now involved in a new project, which is Imperative 21. We'll talk later, okay. But let's keep on in the micro, in the companies. Is it right now the right time to become a B Corp company, to change our model of business, taking into account that we have the COVID-19 crisis and many things have evolved? There is a big crisis in Spain, all over the world, and all companies have to be very, very careful what we do, because they are risking their businesses. Is this the right now, or we will have to wait for a while in order to have, let's say, a normalization of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question, Diego. And you know, we were nervous. B Lab was nervous back in February, March, April of this year, as the pandemic was coming and everybody was locking down, and a huge negative impact on businesses all around the world, as obviously as everybody knows. And we were worried that we would see a huge decline in B Corps, in companies requesting to be B Corps, or in existing B Corps being able to maintain their certification. Because of course they've got other more important things to focus on, like keeping the lights on and making sure they can stay in business. We were blown away that we actually saw a huge increase in submissions for people to become B corporations, and almost no attrition in companies seeking recertification. And we were curious as to why that was the case, because it seemed counterintuitive to us. And when we spoke to the CEOs, what they said was, there's never been a more important time for us to demonstrate that our values stay at the center of our business, not only in good times, but in challenging times. Because if our workers, if our suppliers, if our customers know that we're keeping them in the center of our vision, even during difficult times, they know that we're loyal to them and that we care for them, they're going to care for us. And so at this time, we found that actually it's a time where the leaders are leading even more, and the distance between those leaders and everybody else is getting wider, because now you can really see the people that are going to stand with you even when times are difficult. And so right now we're seeing that as a very important time for businesses, and they're finding it to be quite advantageous to rally with their workforce to collectively figure out how to reinvent their business model. Because the truth is, the dirty little secret for all of us who have been CEOs or senior executives in our companies, the dirty little secret that we don't want to tell anybody is that we really don't have all the answers. The answers are actually among the employees, among the workers, among our customers. Like, the answers are always outside of us. Our job is to be humble enough to listen to all of the wisdom that is all around us. And that companies that show up with that kind of humility and that kind of care, like B corporations, actually end up being more innovative at this time. And at a time when you really have to completely change your business model in the new environment, you need everybody contributing their best ideas. And people are willing to do that when they feel cared for, not when they feel like they're being made to be disposable. And so I think this is a time where it's even more important to live your values in your company, because it's gonna reflect back on the types of commitments you get from all of your stakeholders to help you not just stay in business, but to help your business thrive.
Okay. Now you have convinced us, has convinced our audience, which are businessmen from the industrial sector. Right. But what about capital markets? How do you convince capital markets that the focus has to change from them, from the shareholders, to all the stakeholders? Recently, we saw an ad, a video in the Nasdaq screenshot talking about 21, your new project. How do you convince capital markets to start investing in this kind of businesses?
Well, Diego, I think you raised the NASDAQ partnership with Imperative 21 with the launch for the Reset campaign. And that's like a good example. I'd say 2, 3, 5 years ago, there's no way that one of the major stock exchanges in the world partners to talk about the end of shareholder primacy and the transition to stakeholder capitalism. That seems, again, very counterintuitive for a stock exchange to embrace that message. And whether it's NASDAQ in the US or the B3 Bovespa exchange in Sao Paulo, both of whom are partnering with Imperative 21, what we're seeing is that the capital markets are recognizing that we cannot have healthy markets, including healthy capital markets, in an unstable system. And whether it's rising inequality or accelerating climate risk, we have a very unstable system. That unstable system is the single biggest thing that will depress stock performance over time. As you know, over 80% of the performance of a public stock is based on how the market is doing overall, not just how the individual company is doing. And so if 80% of your returns are based upon overall market performance, then you must be attentive to managing systemic risk in that marketplace, and supporting companies like B corporations, supporting initiatives like Imperative 21 and the Reset campaign. Align your company or your industry or your trade association or your exchange, your platform, with this need to shift from an outdated, old, failed model of shareholder primacy to a much more vibrant and resilient and powerful model of stakeholder capitalism, because it's going to be in the best long-term interests of your shareholders, because their interests in the long term are going to be tied to market performance. That being said, Diego, it's not only better for the market, but also for many, many individual companies, as we mentioned before, being able to attract and retain the best talent, being able to have not only loyal, but evangelical customers talking about how proud they are to support this kind of a company. Like, those are very powerful economic indicators that drive us. And then the last thing I would say, in addition to the business case, because there's many different studies that show, and one of the Imperative 21 partners, Just Capital, has looked at the performance of companies in the top quintile around stakeholder capitalism metrics and compared them to those in the bottom quintile. And they outperform those companies by over 40% over the last 5 years. So there's lots of quantitative evidence that this is a better business model. But that being said, I think the most powerful thing that we're seeing is that, the business model aside, there's also a moral imperative to revisit the social contract between business and society, and recognize that business exists to serve society, to serve the people in it, to protect our natural resources for our children and our children's children. And that's part of the social contract that has gone out of whack in the last 20, 30, 50 years, where we've had a much more globalized economy, but also a much more financialized economy that has said that the only purpose of business is to maximize the profit for the shareholders, which are typically people that look like you and me and not like most people in the world. And so in addition to the business case, there's also just a human case to running business in a way that we can be proud of, that would make our parents proud for the way we're running our businesses, and also make our children proud of the way we're running our businesses. So I think it's both. And I think that even investors are people too, and investors have children that they want their children to be proud of them. Investors have parents who gave them these opportunities. They want their parents to be proud of them, which means they show up as full human beings when they make their investments, which means they need to care about the impact of their investment decisions on everybody, not just on themselves. Even if they keep in mind that if they do this the right way, it is going to manage systemic risk, it is going to increase market health, and it is going to lead to better returns most of the time over the long term for their beneficiaries.
Okay, so you already introduced something about Imperative 21, the new project, let's say, project that you are involved right now. Tell us about that. What is Imperative 21?
So Imperative 21 is a business-led network that is driving economic systems change. There are that network is stewarded by 8 organizations, including B-Lab, the B-Team, Just Capital, large corporate CEOs like Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, groups like Conscious Capitalism or Common Future, and media enterprises like Participant Media, and global impact investors like the Global Impact Investing Network. Those steward organizations have recognized that no matter what they're doing individually, there's something that needs to take place collectively to help shift the economic system. Because no matter how many individual businesses, even 3,500 B Corps, are not changing the system. They are a very tiny part of a much, much bigger global economy. And even if it's 30,000 businesses, it's still tiny. And so what we need is those individual businesses, those individual CEOs that are your Amec members, are operating inside of a cultural context and inside of a set of economic incentives that either make it easier for them to operate consistent with stakeholder capitalism or make it more difficult. And so currently, especially in the US, as an example, we live in a culture that's focused on me and mine and more. And we need to shift to a culture that is about ours and enough, right? A culture of hyper-individualism to a culture of interdependence, from a culture that focuses on what's best for me in the short term to a culture that's what's best for all of us in the long term. That culture shift is not possible by any one company or even by any one community of businesses like B Corps. That has to be done in partnership together. And so the Reset campaign that we just launched is an example of the first really global, comprehensive public engagement campaign to focus on the need to shift the economic system, to reset the economic system, especially in the age of COVID. We now have an incredible opportunity that no generation in recent memory has ever had, which is to reset our economic system onto a new trajectory that centers the importance of taking care of our people and taking care of the planet on whose the natural life on the planet on whose resources we all depend. And so Imperative 21 is a business-led network that has different coalitions that are working on whether it's culture shift like the Reset campaign, or working on systemic and structural changes to finance in the capital markets, or working with large corporations or SMEs to help them accelerate their transition to stakeholder capitalism. This is one of the first global efforts to not only share a common vision for where we need to go, but also to make sure that we have a common framework for how we're going to get there. And so what you see behind me now is the Reset campaign is focused on helping us reset our economic system consistent with 3 different imperatives that were co-created by hundreds of different allied organizations around the world during the lockdown. And it said, the Reset economic system must meet these 3 design objectives. We must design for our interdependence and make sure we meet the basic needs of people within the ecological limits of the natural world. We must invest for justice to make sure that those that are currently marginalized get enough access to capital and resources, leadership and ownership of our institutions, that we're running our businesses differently, and that we're reducing structural inequality, and that everything we do accounts for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And so that means that our measurement systems, our incentive structures, and our corporate governance all need to be aligned to create value for all stakeholders. And if we do those 3 things together, we will have reset our economic system to center on people and not on profits. And we'll live in a much more prosperous world where there'll be more shared well-being on a healthy planet. And so that's what Imperative 21 is doing. And that Reset campaign that you mentioned with the partnership with NASDAQ and with B3 in Sao Paulo is our first attempt to articulate that narrative where you have business leaders now are the ones calling for a reset. So the business leaders are themselves saying, not only do I need to work on transforming my own organization, but I need to be part of a collective that is helping to shift culture and align incentives so that the entire economy can move in this direction, not just my individual company.
Okay, sounds good, but there is a tough question. How do you do? How can we do altogether this? Is there any hope to reform the current system, the capitalism, as we already know it, or we have to start from the scratch? We have to really, as you said, reset everything and to start from the very beginning. Is this a reformist movement or a revolutionary movement?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Diego. And I think that we would view it as a capitalist reformation, not an anti-capitalist revolution. We very much believe that capitalism has within it the tools that are most effective to allocate resources, to foster innovation, and to create shared well-being. The problem is when capitalism is practiced irresponsibly, without any guardrails, what you end up with is not shared well-being, but just individual profit maximization. And you don't end up on a healthy planet, you actually end up on a planet that's quite ill. And that will ultimately create significant negative impacts for people. And so the question is not about throwing away capitalism and starting from scratch. The issue is, how do we create a more accountable, a more inclusive capitalism that respects all stakeholders? And so if we can create a capitalism that recognizes our fundamental interdependence, that centers the need for fairness and justice, and that through its measurement systems, through its incentive structures, and through its governance structures accounts for the impact on all stakeholders, we'll take the best of what capitalism has to offer, the best of what free markets have to offer, and we'll make them fair and equitable for everybody so that everybody gets to share in the prosperity that capitalism can create. And so we very much think it's possible. And as we sit here in the age of COVID and with racial unrest around the world, and with accelerating climate risk, it's not just that it would be a better future, it may be our best chance at our only future, right? That this is now an imperative to make these changes. It's not just a preference. We are, particularly with climate change coming, we are facing existential threats to the very fabric of society. And the rising inequality is creating existential threats to democracies around the world. If we don't revisit our social contract and create free and fair markets, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very different society that won't be nearly as pleasurable to live in. And we'll hand it over to our children, a much more bleak future than our parents handed to us. So this is a moment of crisis, but it's also a moment of significant opportunity. And it's very much our best opportunity is to reform the existing system, but that reformation is going to be transformational, not incremental. To account for all stakeholders, to center on justice, to design for independence are not incremental changes. Those are fundamental structural changes in how we're managing our economic system. And that's going to be challenging. And that's why I'm really excited to take all of the learnings and momentum from the B Corp community globally and contribute them into a much bigger network of partnership through Imperative 21, where all the different networks from circular economy and the Well-Being Business Alliance, or Conscious Capitalism can all come together under one tent to say, let's reset together, because the imperative of the 21st century is to drive economic systems change so we can create shared well-being on a healthy planet. That's a very powerful message that requires all of us to work together.
Okay, we are running out of time. It's been very interesting, but we need to follow with the next activities of the Fórum Amec. Just to end the interview, what will you say to our audience? They are mainly businessmen from small and medium-sized companies from Spain that are acting globally from this industrial sector. And what will be your final message to them?
Thank you. That's a good question. I would say the final message will come from them, not from me. The final message will be about what they choose to do at this moment of crisis and opportunity in our world. And the final message will be, how do they choose to meet this moment with the incredible power that they have as business leaders, and specifically as small business leaders. Many people always look, and the media tends to look to large corporations to be the voice of business. And in my experience, the most innovation and the most powerful leadership tends to come from small businesses and family-owned businesses who appreciate putting relationships, not just transactions, at the center of their work, and recognize that they're acting not just for themselves, but for future generations. And so I would say the last word is not from me, that the last word is from the Amec community of small business leaders in Spain. And that the future of the economic system actually is going to depend upon how they choose to act in this next moment and coming out of this crisis, and if they can create a beautiful opportunity for their own businesses, for their own workers, for their own children, then our job at Imperative 21 is to shine a light on their leadership and help make it easier for other people to follow them so that their legacy is a healthier economic system for everybody, not just for the few. So I would give your business leaders the last word, and they'll let me know what they're doing, and then we can celebrate their actions. Okay, thank you very much, Jay. It has been a very interesting interview. You said before that you don't have all the answers, but you have a lot of questions for our audience, and we try to think out them. Thank you, and I hope that our audience also have enjoyed a lot with the interview. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Diego. Appreciate it. Acabamos así la entrevista con Jay Coen Gilbert, fundador de B Corp e impulsor de Imperative 21, y seguimos con nuevas actividades en el Fórum Amec. Gracias.